Okay, so been a while, a bit busy at the start of this year than I wanted to be. Not much time for extra learning and stuff. Anyways, I wanted to still get another video out at the end of this month, and I wanted to look at the cat command inside of Linux. Main reason being is I figured if Linux is the platform I intend to use more or less for the rest of my life, unless something else happens to come along whenever, I can't see that happening over Windows. I actually want a proper understanding of how it works before I continue with the Odin programming language, as I feel like understanding your operating system is going to carry benefits over to the programming language itself. Like I said, I want to learn more about the cat command, or I've been looking into the cat command, and it's been helping me get a proper understanding on how some things are working inside of Linux. Now, the cat command is short for concatenation. Its job is to take some type of input and then concatenate them together. And what I can do here is I can pass in a file to the cat command. So I can see here I have one file inside of this directory called math.python, and I can pass in math.python to the cat command, and if I enter it, it is just going to display that text. Now, what is actually happening there? What is going on? Why is it taking it and then just printing the text out if its job is to concatenate these things? Well, if I go over here, I am currently inside of the root directory, and I can cd into the dev directory. I'm going to assume that is short for developer or device. I think it is short for device, not developer. And then I can print out what is actually stored inside of this directory. And we can see here, if I was to scroll up, I'm going to come across something called standard out. I'm going to come across standard out, standard in, and standard error. So whenever you're programming and you use something like a print command, or you use std cout inside of C, C++, I think it's printf inside of C, and it's the fmt print functions. My understanding is that what they're using, they are using these files right here. They're using this standard output file, unless you're formatting an error message, in which case, if you're doing good programming standard practices, you probably just want to direct it to standard error. So standard out, as you can see, is a link. I believe it is a soft link. I'm not sure if it's a hard link. And it goes into something called a file descriptor, and it has the file descriptor 1. If I was to go to file descriptor 1, you would see that that is also a link, and it links to this folder up here, which is PTS. So if we were to go inside of PTS and then print out what is inside of here, we can see that what I'll eventually do is we get to here. We have the 0 and the 1, which is standard input and standard output. Full disclosure here, this is kind of where my knowledge of Linux is dropping off. I'm still learning Linux, understanding things, and I can't fully explain this. What I can see here is that these aren't regular files. Regular files have just a dash here. If it's a directory, it has a D here. If it's a link, it's an L. Here we have a C. And to my understanding, I believe this stands for it is a character device. It is something that is designed for the reading and writing of character information. I could be wrong on that. Feel free to correct me, but that is my understanding. So when we are actually calling something and it is writing to standard output, it's writing to this file here, and eventually along the chain, it actually dumps its information into this character device. And this character device, by default, you can change where this information is read and written to. By default, is linked to the terminal window. So when I asked the cat command and passed in Python, what it's doing, it's taking the math.python file as its input. The cat command looks at it, and then it passes everything into that file to the standard output. Standard output eventually goes to where it goes, and that is linked to the console window, and then that is why it is displayed. Now, another thing that you can do with standard output is we can redirect where it goes. And you can redirect standard output by using the angle bracket that points to the right. So if I was to do this again, and I would say, instead of output being linked to the console window, I would like you to redirect that output into some other file. So just some like here. What we'll see here is we now have another file called sum. And sum is functionally an exact copy of the math.python file. So we don't want this. I don't want this. This was just an example. And we can see here that we have the standard input. So what happens if I was to run the cat command, but not run anything with it? Well, what it's going to do is it's going to start reading from the standard input. You can see here that I ran the cat command. I didn't pass it any other type of file. So the cat command by default, it needs a file. It wants to read a file. So the file it's going to read from when I just run this command on its own is the standard input file over here. And you can see that has the file descriptor 0. And if you go into the other folder, I believe it was just the value of 0 as the character device. So what happens here is I can now put stuff here. And what happens when I press enter? Well, when I press enter, it is going to take the input that it receives and it's going to pass that input into the standard output. So functionally, it's just going to echo whatever I type, assuming I have my mouse in the right window when I press enter. Pardon me. And this will just keep going on. And I can't type and talk at the same time. But what's happening is it's constantly reading from the standard input, and it doesn't matter what I put or how much I put, it is just reading from that input file. What most files have, I believe, I will say most, I suppose there's ways to mess with it, probably if you're smart enough, but what files tend to have is an end of file, and that is Control D. So if you press the Control D, this is a little sort of invisible character that tells a program that, hey, the file is finished, stop reading it now. So I press Control D now, you can see I've exited the cat command. And all of that text is just being read line by line, and then it has been passed into standard output, and that printed it out to the console window. So what we can go back and do is we can then say cat redirect standard output into a text file. So just a file called text. So what happens now? So what is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen when I press enter now? Remember up here that the cat command took my input from the standard input file, passed it to standard output, and by default it is linked to the console window. What we've done here is we have redirected the standard output into this new text file. So when I press enter, the command isn't echoed back to me because standard output is no longer linked to the actual console window, the terminal window. I keep using those words interchangeably from using Windows for so long. But that output is now being forced into this other text file. So if I just keep throwing things around like this, well, you can see here that when we pass in the end of file, we go out of it. But if I was to cut out the text file, so I say use the text file as your input and pass that into the standard output, you can see there that all of that text has been printed out to the console window because the output was placed inside of that file. So there's another thing that we can do. I want to make just a copy of a file right now. So I do math.python, and then I say just redirect that into a copy because I don't want to mess with this original file. And now I have a copy of that file. If I do cat and I do my text file and my copy file, we'll kind of see what the main functionality of the cat command actually is. And that is to concatenate things. Concatenate, to my understanding, that word literally means take two strings and stitch them together. And all these files are just big, long strings of text. What it's going to do is it is going to take this text file over here. It is going to take the copy file over here. It is going to get the text from the first file we give it first, and then it's going to take the text from the copy file second, paste them together, pass that to the standard output, and by default that is going to go into the terminal window because that's where standard output points by default. And you can see that is exactly what has happened. Individually, these files contain just their own little text, but when you cut them out, it concatenates them. So that is the gist of it. I believe you can pass in as many files as you want to this, more or less. I don't think there is a functional limit to this. I think you might even be able to pass in the same files over again. I don't think I've done this before, but yes, you can just keep passing in files if this is what you want. Another thing you can do is you can then redirect that standard output into a new file. So let's say this here was 3 distinct files and you just wanted to quickly combine them into one bigger file. What you can do is you can go, I want to make a new file out of this. So we'll make a new file called new, and then we'll print that out. I'll actually zoom out a bit. I don't think you can see that full command. You know what? I'll close this window over here because we're done with this section. So we'll close this if we press the right buttons. And you can see here, the last command I ran was this one here. We had the text, copy text, but we redirected standard output into this new file. And we've done that again. So we just functionally overwritten it. We'll have a look at that in a second. But if we just print out the new command, which again, cat is very good at just printing out files because it doesn't concatenate anything if you just have one file. And new was just a combination of those 3 files. In this case, it was just text file over. Again, twice over. And I think the last 2 things I want to talk about is, first of all, this new thing right here what happens if I wanted to add something new to it, but I didn't want to overwrite the data that was there. So here, if I was to do this now, just with the text command, what's going to happen when you just have one angle bracket, that tells standard output to truncate the file or create a new file if it doesn't already exist. Functionally, delete everything in the file, start again, and then start writing the text. So if I was to cut out new right now, you can see most of the text is gone. But what happens if I wanted to add back in that Python code? If I add in a second angle bracket to this, I'm still redirecting standard output, but I am telling it, do not truncate the file, do not delete or overwrite the contents, start at the bottom of the file and append your output there. If we just pass in the math.thing there, and then print out new again, we can see that this file, it's got the text in again. I forgot to delete the text, but it's had the text file reappended to it a second time, and it's also had the math.python added to it as well. But the original content was not deleted. And the last thing I want to kind of look at is just a little trick. If in this example, this is a very niche example, and you might never use it, but it just popped into my head, so I kind of want to demonstrate it. Let's say I ran this Python file right here. So if I run this Python file, you can see nothing happens. The reason for nothing happens is there's nothing actually really going on in that file. There's no information being displayed. What happens if I wrote a big long Python file, some little bit of a script, and the output wasn't there, and I can't be fucked to go back into whatever text editor I am using? You could use the cat command, and you could then decide to not pass in any file. So we're going to read from the standard input. You could then pipe the output of this cat command. So once we're done reading from the standard input, take the output you want to display to the console window and then pass that into a new command. And we can then say that the command we want you to pass that to is cat again, but this time I want you to append that output from the second cat command into math.python. And all I want to do is just do a basic print function, and I just happen to know by heart that it is Z, what I'm looking for. So we want to pass that in. I'm going to end this file and end this reading. And now if I do python.math.py, you can see the display, the actual silly math calculation that's going into it is being displayed, because if we cut out Python, we see that the input that I just give to this cat command up here was appended onto the end of the math file. Yeah, you can see it there, print Z, so Z gets printed out. You know, if you ever run into a situation where you're like, shit, I really just need to append one little thing on the end of this file, this could do it. And what you could do is you could then probably create an alias out of this. Now I think about it, this is a bit beyond where I was planning on going, but alias, just say append for short, is equal to cat space. You'd have to pass the file in. I don't know enough about variables yet, but I feel like that would work, but I don't know how to pass in a variable. So I'm not even sure you can do that way. Okay, my Linux knowledge dies off there. I'm going to end this video there. I successfully illustrated and spoke over what I wanted to. Anyways, if you watched this far, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.